The world has changed because of what Trump has done. And the American people, including independents and some Republicans, know how bad he is, know how much he's misrepresented, know how he's getting close to getting us in a war. I said, as the walls close in on this man, I'm worried he's going to get us to war in Iran. Unfortunately, I may have been right. The fact of the matter is there's a lot at stake in this election.
A few years later.
President Biden is promising a response after 3 U.S. troops were killed in a drone strike in Jordan. 38 others were injured in the attack carried out by Iran-backed militants, and the number is expected to rise.
Over the weekend, President Biden said he's ready to take action if Congress is serious about solving the border issue.
If that bill were the law today, I'd shut down the border right now and fix it quickly. And Congress needs to get it done.
Starting another fucking war.
All right, guys, so we got to talk about an escalation of war in the Middle East. Again, this is not my favorite topic to talk about, but I have to talk about it because there is some truth serum that was caught on hot mic by Joy Reid, who was in the middle of a Trump deranged rant, which is something that she goes on a nightly basis. However, when she was briefly taken off the screen, the hot mic was still on, and she admitted the quiet part out loud about Joe Biden. Tells you everything you need to know about these people and what they really believe. But before I get into this clip of Joy Reid admitting the quiet part out loud about her Lord and Savior, Joe Biden, I have to give you guys some background into what she may or may not have been referring to, which again is the escalating tensions and the possibility of war in the Middle East as the Biden administration allegedly is planning a military response to a deadly attack in Jordan that resulted in the deaths of 3 American soldiers and wounded dozens of others. Now, this was a drone attack that U.S. intelligence officials believe may or may not be connected to Iran. Okay, Iran could have funded or been responsible for this attack.
Idris.
Just to follow up, you said Iran was behind the attack. So what does that mean? Have you seen evidence of financing or directing anything specific to this attack, not just generally, but specifically?
So maybe I need to clarify further from what Lita had mentioned. We know that Iran funds these groups, like Kataib Hezbollah. We know that these IRGC-backed militias are the ones responsible for attacks on our troops in Iraq and Syria. Beyond that, we're doing an intelligence assessment. We don't have. I can't give you today that.
This attack, linking it to Iran.
We just know that Iran funds these groups like Kataib Hezbollah and other groups that have attacked our forces, but I don't have more to share on that.
You're saying, right?
As a general matter, yes.
Yeah, so I want you guys to understand the logic of the Pentagon. They're saying, look, we really can't tell you for sure whether or not Iran funded or is behind these attacks, but hey, they fund Hezbollah, they fund Hamas, they fund the Houthi rebels. Again, we don't know exactly who did these attacks or where they came from, but we know that Iran is behind it, okay? And again, this is used to justify calling for immediate retaliation strikes against Iran, which is something that Joe Biden allegedly is planning. And you have neocons like Nikki Haley in the mainstream liberal media calling for the exact same thing. Take a look.
What would that mean in practice? When you say Biden, you say Biden didn't do something. What was that something that he should have been doing?
The very first strike that hit, you punch and you punch back hard. What they should be doing is going after every ounce of production of those missiles. Wherever those missiles are, you take that out. You keep doing. You take out the training sites. You go and you.
But does that risk escalating a war?
Does that mean striking Iran directly?
It means striking the resources that are allowing them to hurt our troops. That's what you're doing. It's not going after
but they're backed by Iran. Iran says that they're not declaring the shots, but Iran's training them. They're providing intelligence. They're providing weapons.
And this goes
there
back.
would be no Hamas without Iran, Hezbollah without Iran, or Houthis without Iran.
But
yes, you're going.
Iran is a really big escalation. And
you go after wherever those missiles are, the production, wherever it is in Iraq and Syria, you take that out. Wherever it is in Lebanon that they're doing that, you take that out. You go after the leaders making the decisions. It's not after Iran, the country. It's after the people who are making these decisions. When Soleimani was assassinated, it sent a chill up their spine. They literally, it took their breath out. You have to be strategic. It's not starting war. It's actually preventing war.
Yeah, so I think that Nikki Haley is forgetting that when Trump took out General Soleimani and threw up the American flag like it's the set, Trump was in charge, right? Not Biden, okay? A guy that I actually trust in a situation like this to navigate a potential world war He's not in office, okay? We have Biden in office, okay, who's, an empty suit at this point, okay? So I'm just saying, I think there's a huge difference in regards to the response that we did back then versus the potential escalation now. And you have some Congress members like Congressmember Corey Mills from Florida, who I met in person, by the way. He served in the military. He served in Iraq, and he's extremely knowledgeable when it comes to foreign policy. And he's saying, look, maybe, just maybe, we should wait and actually assess the situation before we just jump into striking Iran directly, even though we really don't know exactly how or why this attack happened. Take a look.
I want to see a full detailed analysis, because here's the whole thing. When we talk about the Lindsey Grahams of the world, so the Cornyn's of the world, hit them, the question that I ask is, what have we done to prevent the retaliation from coming back to us? We can't do this tit for tat if we haven't even increased the protection, security, and identified why this happened to begin with. That's just going to enable it to happen again, and we're going to have more dead soldiers. That's not the key here. What we want to do is to prevent the loss of life, to prevent these types of kinetic activities. And so having a immediate reaction, which is emotional, for a proportionate and equal response, that all sounds good, but we got to get the facts to ensure that we actually can do this in a more methodical and more carried out way.
Yeah, I don't think that's an unreasonable thing to ask for, right? Think before you retaliate, okay? Let's actually think through the next step before just responding just to say that we responded, okay? Think about the potential consequences of what the response could lead to in a potential escalation, right? I don't think that's too unreasonable to ask. Again, I'm America first, okay? And I want to avoid these foreign conflicts, but don't get me wrong. You don't just let a foreign adversary kill American troops and they get away with it, right? So all I'm saying is that, yeah, we got to hit them back. But again, we have to make sure, first and foremost, we understand how the attack was done, why it was done, and who did the attack for certain before actually responding and understanding the next steps in the response and how it could potentially escalate. It has to be done in a methodical way. Again, I don't trust the Biden administration to actually do this correctly, okay? This is why I wish Trump was in office for situations like this. But with that being said, again, I'm not the only person who is afraid of Joe Biden starting a war and getting us into World War III. Apparently, Joy Reid, who is a staunch Biden defender, apparently, okay, when she's not on air spewing propaganda, she also is afraid that Joe Biden may start a war. Take a look.
Congressional Republicans love to latch on to President Biden and Democrats' successful policies and take credit for things they didn't do, while tying themselves into pretzels to do nothing for the American people for the sake of Donald Trump. Case in point, fixing what they say is a crisis at the border, with congressional negotiators continuing work on a bipartisan deal to tie border policy changes to funding for Ukraine. Over the weekend, President Biden said he's ready to take action if Congress is serious about solving the border issue.
If that bill were the law today, I'd shut down the border right now and fix it quickly. And Congress needs to get it done.
Starting another fucking war. Still trying to kill the deal. He bragged about blocking progress and said, please, please blame him if it fails. Meanwhile, the main Republican negotiator on border security, Oklahoma Senator James Lankford, is defending the proposed deal and called out fellow Republicans who oppose it.
Yeah, so you seen that, you heard that. Okay, so behind the scenes, right, when Joy Reid isn't going on her Trump deranged rants, because that's what she's told to do by her handlers at MSNBC, is to boohoo, whine, and cry about Trump all night. She doesn't really seem to be too fond about Biden in regards to his foreign policy. She is afraid that he may start another effing war, right? I'm assuming that she got briefed on the fact that Joe Biden is planning to escalate. He's going to issue a military response to Americans being killed in Jordan. And I'm assuming that is her off-the-cuff response, right? That's her uncensored response, right? Joe Biden about to start another effing war, okay? Either that or maybe she's responding to this possibility of a civil war when it comes to the border situation.
That's why, Maria, when I say it's an invasion, it is an invasion. It's a cartel army. You know, the founders never dreamed we'd have a president like this one who would just open the door to everyone. And they said, well, invasion if an army came. Well, we're facing an army.
Yeah,
we're facing an army. And they're well armed, they're well coordinated, they're making millions and millions of dollars off of Joe Biden. Don't mess with Texas. We're serious about securing our border, and I'm glad the president stood down on Friday and did not confront us. That would be the wrong thing to do. We don't want a confrontation, and they shouldn't want a confrontation.
Well,
we're just doing our job. Let us do our job.
Because, I mean, what is this going to turn into a civil war? I mean, you've got the Texas rights versus federal rights, both sides with guns.
And we believe constitutionally we are right. We have a right to defend our citizens. We have a right to defend this country. Okay. And we're just doing the job. This whole idea of Shelby Park, that they would come there, is just ludicrous. Yeah. Look, these young men and women who serve our National Guard and our DPS, these are the best of the best. Why would he want to send anyone down to confront them? Yeah. I'm glad they stepped down, but they need to do the job. And the only reason he's paying attention now is because of the election in November. Yeah, that's the only reason he's paying attention.
Real quick on the Chinese national.
Okay, I don't know. I have to leave it open to interpretation because we only got a small snippet of it. But to me, it would make the most sense in the context of what's going on in the Middle East. But again, she could be referring to the possibility of, I don't know, civil war over the border. Okay, I'm not sure exactly which one. I think that she's referring to what's going on in the Middle East. But you guys let me know. Okay, either way, this gives me a good opportunity to talk about what's going on in the Middle East. Which leads me to this segment here from Tucker on X, in which he's going to speak with Joe Kent about what's going on in the Middle East and the possibility of escalating to a war with Iran and kind of what that means, okay? And, you know, I really respect Tucker for segments like this because, again, it's tough in today's political environment to tell the truth about what's going on in the Middle East and how some of our policies of allowing conflicts to extend that we probably shouldn't be involved in the first place has consequences that will get us involved in a broader regional conflict. So I want to go ahead and play this clip because, again, Tucker is, I think, on point with this.
Yesterday, the Pentagon announced that 3 U.S. troops had been killed and dozens injured after a drone loaded with explosives struck them at a base in Jordan near the Syrian border. Now, none of that can be confirmed. The details, anyway, the location of the attack, and there's some question about whether that's true, but there is no question that American troops were killed yesterday, and the reaction to that, mixed with sadness, was highly political, in fact, even strategic. Within moments of this news breaking, Lindsey Graham, the Republican senator from South Carolina, called for blood. Quote, "Hit Iran now, hit them hard," he tweeted. Nikki Haley, of course, piled on. Here's what she posted to X. Quote, "As a military spouse, my heart breaks for the families who lost loved ones. This shows the barbaric nature of our enemies in Iran, and it shows that they would not be attacking our troops if Joe Biden weren't so weak in his treatment of Iran. We should retaliate with full force, the full force of American strength. It's the only way to prevent further war. If we do not, these attacks will continue." Interesting. All of this came immediately. They were joined by Wes Clark, the former presidential candidate and commander of NATO, and buffoons like John Cornyn, who apparently is a senator from Texas, etc., all saying the same thing. Let's go to war with Iran. They all said this in both sides. Here's Nancy Pelosi on CNN telling you yesterday that anyone who is not for this, who would like, say, a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas, is working for Vladimir Putin.
For them to call for a ceasefire is Mr. Putin's message. Mr. Putin's message. Make no mistake, this is directly connected to what he would like to see. Same thing with Ukraine. It's about Putin's message. I think some of these protesters are spontaneous and organic and sincere. Some, I think, are connected to Russia. And I say that having looked at this for a long time now, as you know.
You think some of these protests are Russian plants?
I say they're plants. I think some financing should be investigated. And I want to ask the FBI to investigate that.
It's hard. Yeah, so the reason why Tucker is bringing up the, calls for ceasefire in Israel and Palestine is because a lot of this has escalated as a result of Israel's response to the Hamas attacks. Okay, and, there was somebody in my comment section on one of the last videos I did about Nancy Pelosi and the response from the left to her, basically accusing them of being Russian assets, okay? And also she accused them of being funded by China as well, too. Somebody said that if you're not 100% on the side of Israel, then you're with the Antichrist, right? Somebody literally said that in my comment section. And it really blew my mind because, it really does show you how polarized both sides of this issue are, right? And this is why I tend to take a neutral stance because I've actually thought through what happens if the United States gets involved with this conflict that seems to be escalating with Israel and Hamas, okay? And the fact that, what's happening is that Israel is killing a lot of Palestinian civilians. And that has broader geopolitical consequences that I think a lot of people just haven't thought through, right? This is why I'm not on board with just sending Israel a blank check, because I understand what could possibly happen if Israel essentially goes all the way when it comes to defending themselves against Hamas, right? And, you know, considering the fact that Israel allegedly knew about this attack a year before it happened, and they ignored it and then lied about knowing about the attack, and then came out and said, well, we knew about the attack, but, you know, we didn't think they had the capabilities to actually execute it the way that they did. Now, again, Israel has some of the strongest borders in the world and some of the best intelligence in the world, funded by U.S. taxpayer dollars, of course. And this grave mistake made by the Netanyahu government, I just got questions on whether or not we should be losing American lives, basically going down behind Israel, trying to make up for a fatal defense mistake that they made in a conflict that is not as black and white as the American media wants to make it seem like.
In many ways, what's happening in the Middle East, and in particular with Gaza right now, we have some moral responsibility for both sides in a way, because we provide help and funding for both Arab nations and Israel. And so we definitely have a moral responsibility, and especially now today, the weapons being used to kill so many Palestinians are American weapons, and American funds essentially are being used for this. But there's a political liability, which I think is something that we fail to look at, because too often there's so much blowback from our intervention in areas that we shouldn't be involved in. You know, Hamas, if you look at the history, you'll find out that Hamas was encouraged and really started by Israel, because they wanted Hamas to counteract Yasser Arafat. And you say, well, yeah, that was better then and served its purpose, but we didn't want Hamas to do this. So then we as Americans say, well, we have such a good system, we're going to impose this on the world. We're going to invade Iraq and teach people how to be Democrats. We want free elections. So we encourage the Palestinians to have a free election. They do, and they elect Hamas. So we first indirectly and directly through Israel help establish Hamas. Then we have election. Then Hamas becomes dominant, so we have to kill them. You know, it just doesn't make sense. During the 80s, you know, we were allied with Osama bin Laden. And we were contending with the Soviets. It was at that time our CIA thought it was good if we radicalized the Muslim world. So we financed the madrasa schools to radicalize the Muslims in order to compete with the Soviets. There's too much blowback. There's a lot of reasons why we should oppose this resolution. It is not in the interest of the United States. It's not in the interest of Israel either.
Right? I'm just saying, okay? I'm not saying that we shouldn't defend Israel from invasion if there's a threat of Israel being taken over by radical Islamic extremists, but Israel's defense systems are so good that I don't think that that's a realistic threat, right? I don't think that Hamas is a realistic threat of actually taking over Israel. But if they were, then yeah, I would say it's in America's best interest to defend Israel, okay? Because they do have the right to exist, and they are an ally in the Middle East. And I do believe, again, protecting them is in our best interest. But again, I have to ask, is funding the assault against Hamas in the U.S. best interest, right? I'm not saying that, hey, we need to force them to stop. I'm just saying, do we really have to fund it? Is it in the U.S. best interest to fund it if it possibly could lead to an escalation of a broader regional conflict that could mean World War III? I'm just saying, right, in which, you know, we could possibly lose American lives. I'm just saying, I hope it's not anti-Semitic, okay, to ask these questions. I also hope it's not anti-biblical to ask these questions as well, too, right? I'm just saying, I have questions. I think people like Tucker have questions. I think a lot of people have questions about our foreign policy when it comes to Israel, that I think that it should be fair to at least say, is this in America's best interest, right? I'm just saying, just something to chew on.
For most people to believe that a person in his or her 80s could be evil, but she is evil, and she's speaking lies. What you heard is totally dishonest. But there's a point to the dishonesty, and that is a war with Iran, which people in Washington have been agitating for more than 20 years. So are we going to war with Iran? Are we already in a war with Iran? And if so, what are the consequences? Most Americans have no idea. It's not even something they're thinking about, but they should be. Joe Kent is a former Green Beret. He's a combat veteran who lost his wife in one of these wars. He's running for Congress in Washington State in the 3rd Congressional District, and he has an interesting and highly informed perspective on this, and we're honored to have him join us now. Joe Kent, thank you so much for coming on today. So when you see all of this, and you hate to be cynical, but you really can't be too cynical when you're dealing with the war party in Washington. It did seem like a coordinated response very quickly, moments after the announcement of the tragic death of these American servicemen. What do you make of the response from both parties in Washington to the deaths yesterday?
I mean, this whole thing, we've seen it coming, Tucker. We left our troops in these vulnerable locations, like on the Jordanian, Syrian, and Iraqi border. Our troops have been attacked, we think, at least 150 times since the October 7th incident began. And so we've seen this coming. This was an inevitable conclusion. So by leaving our troops in these locations, undefended essentially, we left them there as bait because so many people in Washington, D.C. want to go to war with Iran. They want to go to a war with Iran so badly that we will prop up the government of Iraq while the government of Iraq is completely controlled by Iran. We spend billions of dollars every single year funding, arming, training, and equipping the Iraqi government so they can turn around and support the exact same militias that just killed our troops. Biden said it himself in his statement. He accused Iranian-backed militants operating in Iraq and Syria of conducting this attack that killed the 3 Americans and wounded nearly 30 more. That is nothing short of saying the Popular Mobilization Forces, which is part of the Iraqi military that we support. So if you look at just the full scope of the way that we have arranged ourselves in the Middle East, who we're supporting and where our troops are, there's no other logical conclusion other than the fact that we have left them there as bait to be killed by Iranians at the time and place of their choosing so that we can continue to escalate towards a conflict with Iran. And like you said, there was a very coordinated series of talking points that came out almost immediately that we need to go and strike back against Iran. And look, we do need to strike back. We can't just let this go unanswered. But if we start taking strikes inside of Iran itself, that is exactly what the Iranian regime wants. They will benefit from that. If we start attacking Iran the way that we attacked Iraq, the way we attacked Afghanistan, then the Iranian government, the Iranian mullahs, the Ayatollah, the people will rally around them in support. We should be taking calculated strikes back at Iranian proxy groups for self-defense, and then we should immediately get our troops out of these foolish locations before we lose more blood and treasure for absolutely nothing in the Middle East, and before we're sucked further into a regional war.
Yeah. I think that's pretty reasonable, right? I think it's pretty reasonable, okay? I think it's pretty reasonable to think through what we do and why we're doing it and why things seem to be escalating the way that is escalating, okay? I don't think there's anything wrong with asking questions about what's happening and, why are we funding certain things? And look, in a situation like this, it seems that there are a lot of people, whether you're on the left or the right, that kind of understand what's happening and where this is all going, right? That, war is something that, our current political class, they want, they yearn for it, okay? They're bloodthirsty, right? And this exists on both sides of the aisle. And one thing I will say, as a kind of message of unity, okay? Because again, you saw what Joy Reid said behind the scenes, right? She basically was criticizing Biden for starting another war, right? That's if she was talking about Biden's foreign policy in the Middle East, which she may or may not have been. I think that she was. But, Joy Reid also has said things behind the scenes, that goes against the far left LGBTQ agenda. So that people like her are playing a character, right? And, she doesn't really mean a lot of things that she says on television. But regardless, it does tell you about what they really think, okay? And maybe, just maybe, we aren't as distant in regards to our political opinions when it comes to these wars and how the political class operates in regards to putting ourselves in positions where we get involved in these conflicts that we really shouldn't be involved in. I think there are questions about why do we still have all these troops positioned in the Middle East, and are we putting American troops in danger because we want to escalate. We want an excuse to continue to have these wars in the Middle East, right? So again, a lot of questions, not enough answers. I think everybody can agree, though, that the U.S. foreign policy in the Middle East has been an absolute disaster. And again, it's times like this where I really do wish that Trump was back in office, because the guy that we have in office right now, I don't trust him when it comes to navigating the current situation in the Middle East. It is an absolute disaster what's happening. So let me know what you guys think. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. Most importantly, share a Black conservative perspective. Peace.